Welcome back to the Torque Test channel. Man, torque multipliers are crazy. Crazy prices, crazy torque claims. Are these things for real? It boggles the mind, really. Some hand input on one end and they say thousands of foot-pounds of torque out the other. We're talking 1, 2, 3,000 foot-pounds, 5,500 foot-pounds, 7,500 newton meters from a large pepper grinder looking thing. So today we bought and are going to test and take apart a bunch of them in an attempt, a mostly successful one, to destroy an extra large Skidmore torque dyno with one of these by measuring their torque output, which is something we've not been able to find anyone doing before. Everyone just takes these things at their word. And if their torque claims don't raise your eyebrows, their prices just might. Each one of these we test will be doubling or tripling the price from one to the next, finding out if, as you go up in price, do they get better. From $60 to $120, then to $240 Amazon options to our own trusty Snap-ons situated right in the middle, all the way up to $4,000 a pop today. Many people use these things to remove stuck stuff, but just as many use them to torque large stuff to spec. So we're also curious what happens when you throw a torque wrench at one of these things. Is using their input to output ratio for torque wrenches gospel, or is it an all over the place shot in the dark? Let's find out together. First up is the HomCom from Amazon. This is a tool that very much wants to let you know it's made in China. Yeah, well, many of these on this end are. I'll be honest, we bought a couple of these examples and only used one criteria, buying the absolute highest input-output ratio and torque ratings we could find, because that sort of thing wets our whistle. But after today's episode, if you guys want to see more, we're open to your favorites and suggestions. This is going to start us out with the 1:64 ratio HomCom model here we paid $60 for, and also this larger, heavier CalHawk Easy Travel one that's advertising 1:78, meaning you should turn this rotation side with the handle 78 times to make the output side rotate just once. And theoretically, in a perfect world, multiply your own arm's torque output 78 times. Torque multipliers make sense. And they say this one's good for 3,540 foot-pounds, from a simple $60 tool and a whole massive, get ready for it, 5,530 foot-pounds from the 1:78 model. If you have something 5,500 foot-pounds worth of stuck, I'd recommend just burning that thing to the ground, but let's see what they can do. We're going to use the large Skidmore here that we test 1-inch impacts on to see how far we can get. This currently has the largest bolt and nut setup we have on hand for it, with a 500 foot-pound big boy 3/4 inch torque wrench, speccing this thing to the gauge saying 460 with the pressure ratings. So we'll be using a 1.1 times to get to the foot-pounds we'll be showing on screen, but that's all easier said than done. You see, each type of these tools use a reaction arm, equal and opposite physics and all. You need to brace one part of the tool against something fixed in place to apply force to the business end. For many, that's going to be a neighboring lug nut, but while you might find one of those lug nuts 2,000 foot-pounds worth of rusted and stuck on a big rig to remove, you can't tighten one of those to that level or measure them precisely. However, when using a multiplier such as this type, you can use this against the ground, which often will work for your heavy equipment, but we found with these forces levitates our 500-pound Skidmore setup rather hilariously. So you'll see us in this video use various methods, many of them not being very bright decisions. Be happy you're on that side of the screen. Let's do this. By rotating away on the handle side of this pepper grinder type torque multiplier, we'll call it, you see torque climb quickly with minimal effort on our end here. This relationship so far in this example does not stay on friendly terms. You start giving it more and more and the numbers seem to go up slower and slower. The lever handle they provide you isn't the longest in the world, probably for ground clearance, or they just know the tool's limits, but up around 1,000, 1,100 foot-pounds, this model is no longer fun to work. Our force gauge put this at around 130 pounds of force to continue. Plenty of back drag wound up in this thing ready to pinwheel back in the other direction. I'll be honest, we were expecting that a bit. I mean, come on, it's $60. For $60, I still think that's a lot of torque. Nowhere near 3,500 advertised, but let's check out the one that costs twice as much and advertises 5,500 foot-pounds. I mean, yeah, it feels like a lot of spinning on this thing. I'll give it that. And it's more chunky. You can feel you're getting shipped more when you're paying more, but in use, it sort of feels like the other one. When you start huffing and puffing at the top here, we're still at around 1,000, 1,100, and this one did get higher as it turns out with similar effort. 1120 on the gauge. That's good enough for 1,230 foot-pounds. Not exactly blown away with the torque here. All that drama, and our M18 1-inch impact can just trigger pull this thing off, which is not territory we were expecting. Now, you might just be saying, well, add some leverage. That handle is short, and we'd agree with you. But they really don't want you doing that. It's like a 25mm square drive. An inch does fit on it, but again, it's square drive. No sockets fit on this thing, and our inch wrenches aren't much better than this lever is. The socket they give you for this is like for bud nuts. It's square drive on both ends. An adjustable wrench might work if yours is much longer than a foot long. But really, we were saving ourselves with that reality because before our chain solution, we tried some wood block cribbing to see if we could remove over 2,000. It couldn't in any reaction arm solution, but in this particular one and other stupid flavors of it, it was enough to rip the Skidmore steel it's bolted to off the stand in a real fun way. Yeah, don't want to do that. These are like $10,000, so some lessons learned there for sure. But these will both remove 1,000, 1,100, just as easy or maybe easier. In fact, many engineers agree loosening a recently tightened fastener can be 20 to 30% easier in torque, not to get moving, but in peak values. So we'll give the benefit of the doubt here with some numbers in parentheses for what they most likely can do in loosening as well. But you may be asking yourself, well, what's the deal here? You could park a bus in the gap between marketing and reality. Well, for one, this is sort of assuming perfect efficiency transfer in space-age internals, and we'll be opening most of these up to check that out. But for another, this 1-to-78 tool simply isn't one. It's not rocket surgery, you can check it yourself. We just spun this side 360 degrees numerous times until the chalk mark pointed straight up again. And for this tool, that was 1-to-64. It was 64 times that it advertises. And for this 1-in-78 tool, it was just 56. Don't even need a big expensive dyno in this case, just bold-faced lying to you on something you can check yourself. Larger internals are an easy way to transfer torque more efficiently once things are stupid tight, so it came out a little bit on top today. Twice the price though for 10% more action and 100% more BS. Moving on. To the best-selling traditional torque multiplier on Amazon, Nico. This $240 example, twice the last multiplier, is a different style. It has a slimmer head where the multiplication goes on, and then a longer reaction arm you normally use against the ground or something very solid. This is a tool rated for 1,100 foot-pounds and takes half-inch drive in up to 365 foot-pounds. This indicates a 3-to-1 torque ratio, but gear ratio measured to us at 3.25, 3.3 turns to 1. This is what we call drive ratio versus torque ratio, which some brands highlight that difference. But let's check it out for ourselves. We see guys using these with torque wrenches, assuming the output math is pretty clean. Here we're getting 235 foot-pounds from a 100 foot-pound input on the low end, and then 513 foot-pounds from a 200 foot-pound input, and 617 from a 250 input. That's like 2.35, 2.46, and 2.56 to 1 torque ratios as we measure it. So it's increasing with torque. So far, not static like most people assume, and also not a solid 3. Few torque wrenches are going to go anywhere near 365 foot-pounds input with a half-inch drive, so for that, we're going to simply give her the beans with a half-inch breaker bar and your friendly neighborhood jack handle until this thing starts to mega flex in a concerning way, which is good here for 1,005 foot-pounds before the jack handle was developing a kink, and Grandpa's old short Craftsman half-inch breaker bar here putting in some work. You'll love to see it. What all these brands don't love to see is anyone with an impact wrench anywhere near one of these tools. It's stupid, the thing doesn't really work that way, so just don't do it. Anyways, here's us using an impact wrench on the torque multiplier, 1,100 foot-pound impact times a 1,100 foot-pound torque multiplier. I think that's how you open a portal to Narnia. Or just develop carpal tunnel, barely does anything, which tracks. Impacting through a gear set is not a secret hack. Simple old school arm applications of linear uninterrupted torque get you much further. So this is where we're at. These all have effective 64 to 1, 56 to 1, and 3.3 to 1 gear ratios as measured, and that resulted so far in frustratingly all around the same output in torque, though we intend to change that with a rough loosening capacity listed here as well. So far only the Nico is in the wheelhouse of what it advertised doing. And then even so, using this in its mid to upper range where most people will, we see a around 2.5 to 1 effective torque ratio. So using the advertised 3 to 1 as a hard and fast rule, you might be under tightening some things. All right, let's throw some money at the problem. This is our Snap-on GA185, also found under brands like Utica model TMX-2000F or Williams. It's basically a USA made, often called X-4 torque multiplier, and goes for around $750 or 3 times the last one we tested. It's rated for 2,000 foot-pounds, and being an X4 multiplier is a 4 to 1, which means the input can go up to 500 foot-pounds, and in order to get there, you'll be needing a 3/4 inch drive wrench. You don't need a 3/4 inch torque wrench like we'll be using here unless you have to hit a spec. We simply want to measure things, but a cheap 3/4 inch breaker bar usually does the trick quite nicely. So let's see if our old Snap-on is up to the task these days by hitting its 500 limit. So with 400 foot-pounds in, we're getting a very nice 1,710 foot-pounds. That's over 4x. And with this adjusted to 500 foot-pounds in now, the stated max input of this multiplier, we're seeing 2,170 foot-pounds. Sweet. We saw an average 4.3 times the input, making for the output here. Not sure if these are called X4 models because of the effective torque factor they're delivering, but we thought it might be the reaction arm lifting this whole thing or something, but testing with a chain holding it, which does prove to be the smartest method, we're still getting similar here with 250 foot-pounds in, around 4 times, and increasing as you go up in torque from 4 to 4.3. Again, not a super static multiplier to use. All right, and moving on to even more expensive models, thanks to our friend Nick, who we've borrowed Snap-on tools from before, here with 2 examples from Right Tools, the same USA folks who make the Right Grip 2.0 wrenches that top our combination wrench charts. Nick was not only kind enough, but it was his idea for us to test these out. More worried we'd break our equipment than these tools. First up is the Right 9S391. This is a 1,200 foot-pound rated torque multiplier that goes for a near $1 a foot-pound, $1,300. It's like the Nico with a similar max torque rating and half-inch drive in. But this model is 6 to 1 in its ratio, not 3 to 1, meaning you'll only need 200 foot-pounds in to max it out, not 365, which is nice for a half-inch drive tool. 100 foot-pounds in on this thing results in 502 here, and 200 foot-pounds in is a bit of a workout to try and hit, oddly. Going up against the ground might be a bit different, but we felt a lot of rebound on this one, like a bunch of backlash waiting behind each torque wrench swing, seesawing back and forth at you each time. Certainly more solid of a tool, not flexing in the head like the Nico does, but harder to hit 200 foot-pounds in, for example. This resulted in about 1,100 foot-pounds or so for us, more than the Nico, but not dramatically so, and roughly a 5.25 to 1 effective torque ratio here. Just our opinion, maybe not worth the price difference here. Would rather hit one of these with a larger breaker bar. But oh boy, things are about to change here at the top. This here big boy is the Right 9S393A. It's rated for 3,200 foot-pounds, and it's just about $4,000. And if that sounds strange to you, these things can really go up exponentially at the top. Try $18,000 for 5,800 foot-pounds from this Gador, or if you feel like rotating something 175 times to 1, try 37 grand for 40,000 foot-pounds. That's not to take away from this thing though, because it's sweet. It has a ratcheting pawl switch, and this confused us at first because it works backwards to a traditional ratchet. You go in the direction of the clicking to tighten, because in fact it's only ratcheting to remove backlash, which makes using it a frickin' dream. It snugs itself up against whatever you're working on, then just keeps itself clamped there. And with a simple half-inch drive input, this thing climbs in torque real fast from simple wrenching on it, thanks to its 20.25 gear ratio. Getting up to around 600 foot-pounds feels like working on a valve cover bolt, because everything feels cemented in place and the backlash seesaw operation has been removed. Adding torque to this assembly feels really easy. You're not fighting with the multiplier wanting to wind back on you or anything like that. This results in 100 foot-pounds in, making for 1,600 foot-pounds out, or a 16:1 torque ratio. This tool states its own torque ratio separate as being 18.5:1. As we get up to 150 foot-pounds now, we see 2368 on the gauge, and that's 2,600 foot-pounds, 2,600 foot-pounds, or a 17.4:1 torque in to out ratio. This tool will take up to 173 foot-pounds in, but we're not going to do that for a few reasons. One, we don't want to replace this $4,000 tool for Nick if we break it. And two, this chain is sounding mighty taut. And lastly, three, this tool is our ticket out of here. This is probably the only thing within 100 miles that's going to loosen 2,600 foot-pounds. Put some tension on the tool, then you can release the ratcheting pawl mechanism by hand and allow it to go the other direction and remove all that built-up backlash. Then you can set this thing up for loosening, and I'll tell you, few things in life are going to make you feel more like a badass than loosening 2,600 foot-pounds with a $25 ratchet one-handed. If you haven't gotten yourself one of these cheap abuse-loving extendo ratchets, I recommend it. A 1-inch impact could hammer at something like this all day and not remove it, but you can even do so with some spindly arms. This is, no holds barred, one of our favorite tools to use that's ever come across the test bench. I want one, my wallet doesn't want one, but man, I still want one. All right, so let's take some of these apart to see how they work. Then we'll look at our full results and tell you our thoughts on these. Getting past the plastic seal on these pepper grinder guys is pretty simple. Then it's just a matter of some snap ring pliers on the large side of things and unclipping that retention ring. And bada bing, bada boom, a couple taps later, you have a medieval mace looking planetary assembly. And probably the worst case of quality components these eyes have ever seen in a product that was at least functioning. Chinese pot metal would be a very generous description of these castings. And yes, every bit of this is sand cast parts, even the gears. Nothing else could explain the consistency of this rough texture. This is a triple stage planetary gear set. 56 rotations eventually trickle down to rotate once on the other end when it's interacting with the outside ring gear. Now this other, smaller, higher gear reduction model that was cheaper, I'd call this like a more respectable version of the above one here. It at least has some solid beads and heat penetration on the welds, and the gears don't feel like sandpaper. Check out the welds on the more expensive model. It has holes, cavities in the weld, like little to no cover gas was used, no penetration, and even little BBs of slag still stuck to the planetary housing from the popcorn show this must have been when they were welding it. Just garbage grade stuff here all around. In both tools, the gears are made too soft, unsurprisingly. Brief but up to its max capability use on these things has left some wear marks that you wouldn't want to see. And this one's gear ratio at least being true and the price point being reflective of this type of stuff. Let's check out how to not make something like that. Inside the Nico, you find sort of two halves, each side having two hardened pins and gears that will skate a file. So hard, but too small and uneven for us to measure in hardness. This thing saw a Milwaukee high torque and still looks pretty good. And just one stage planetary reduction because, you know, it's just 3:1. And here's the inside of the Snap-on X4 model. Everything's a bit larger in diameter, which allows for 4 instead of 3:1 on this single stage. And the top drive half has 4 pins that go into the planetary gears instead of 2, but otherwise made very similar to the Nico, just much taller, thicker gears to be able to spread that multiplying force over a large tooth engagement and prevent wear, which allows for twice the max torque in this one's case. Its age was showing a bit here, this grease being very tacky and thick. I'd assume that would mean more efficiency loss, not less, like we saw this thing registering over 4:1. But we're going to clean and pack this full of new grease here and assemble it back again. And now it feels happier. You can turn it by hand now, which you couldn't do before. And even from the multiplied side too, spinning it up. Good job, little guy. You've done good today. If you want to consistently hit 1,000 foot-pounds, maybe a bit over in loosening, and to own that tool so it'll do that time and time again, the Nico for $240 might be a sweet spot for you. For less coin, if you're looking for that in a jam on something you just need unstuck right now, next day shipping, you can ignore price, weight, size, max torque claims, and gear ratio of these pepper grinders and just buy this Homcom will link or something like it that reviewers say they counted the ratio on. I wouldn't use it daily, heck monthly near its max, but they do generate some sauce. Then, if money is no object, man, this specific Right Tools ratcheting backlash model, buy it. Then move next door to me so I can use it sometimes. And balancing all of those things, maybe I'm biased, but maybe you would agree as well, the Snap-on / Utica / Williams X4 torque multipliers, sort of a sweet spot for the capability it has. And if you work on stuff 2,000 foot-pounds worth of tight, you should probably own a $50 to $60 3/4 inch breaker bar anyways. Was surprised by its performance, and today we even spotted a Central Tools example. No, not that Harbor Freight Central Tools, the one made in the US. That's probably the way I'd go. Now, this max figure here was determined based on if we took our 150 foot-pound input and instead used 173 foot-pounds. And most of these guys, as a general rule, you're probably going to be applying less torque with a torque wrench than you think versus what is advertised, because this isn't a textbook math problem, it's real life, and plenty of efficiencies get lost here left and right. Appreciate you guys joining us for this one. Thanks to Nick again for letting us borrow a couple of these. If you want us to buy a bunch of pepper grinders to find the best one, let us know. Hit subscribe to be there for it, and thanks for watching.